Good evening, and welcome to the September 27th Rockingham County School Board meeting at the Hose Company 4, Station 41. Welcome. The first order of business is for us to approve the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Any questions or discussion regarding the agenda? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll take a moment of silence. Thank you. Okay. Our first order of business this evening is comments from the public. We don't have anyone signed up to speak this evening. Is there anyone that wishes to address the board at this time? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to highlights by board members. Ms. Lord?
Thank you. This past week, Dr. McQuilkin and I had the opportunity to travel to Richmond to meet with other board members and discuss legislative agenda, and I'm sure Dr. McQuilkin will have other things to say about it. But it was a great experience for me. We got to see other board members for the first time in quite some time and share ideas and just find out what's going on in the rest of the state. So that was a big highlight for me this week. Also, United Way had their day of caring last week, and unfortunately the one I signed up for got rained out, but I know that lots of great things happened in the county. So thanks to everyone who participated in that. And those are my big, and this week I have a highlight coming up. I have a pre-highlight. The state fair is happening in Doswell, Virginia this week, and we have lots of teams competing, and I know I can't remember their names, and I apologize for that, but we had some young men from TA who did quite well in a competition. In small engines, was it, Mr. Fitzgerald? Help me. Tractor troubleshooting, that's what it was. And they placed second or third in the state, so we're very, very proud of them. We also had some other youth participating in other events this week, including Forestry Field Day and Dairyman's, all sorts of great events. So we want to wish all of those competitors good luck this week.
Thank you, Ms. Lohr. Dr. McQuilkin?
Thank you, Ms. Reed. I'm going to piggyback on Ms. Lohr's comments about the legislative meeting, and the one item that I found that would be interesting to most everybody is the fact that the SOLs will be changing. The testing will be more in the line of preliminary. Where are the children? What can we do to help them? And they're working on, obviously it'll be online, and whenever this was mentioned, people were clapping because they're happy to see that we'll be moving toward a more, not a remedial, but at least a way to determine where our students are and what more we can do to help them. Now my second one is that I am thrilled because all the students in the building this year, all of our students in the buildings receive a free breakfast and a free lunch. I thought back when I went to school, we carried our lunches or we walked home. There was no such thing as a cafeteria. So the fact that we have free breakfast and free lunch for our students this school year is a wonderful thing. So I'm very happy to be able to use that, to say that that's one of my highlights.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Mr. Falk? Thank you. Dr. Scheichel?
My first highlight is related to an activity we will complete tomorrow. So it's another one of the attempts to really be innovative in how we use our programs in our schools. And this one involves bringing food from the farm to the table directly. We've talked about this many times. And so tomorrow, a group of us, including, I believe, 6 students or 8 students, I think it's 6, will be at a farm and we'll butcher 2 hogs, and then the meat will make it directly to our schools. And so it's one of the first steps, again, to bring the meat that's the product of our ag production program to our schools, and we hope we can do a whole lot more of that in the future. And then the second one is to congratulate Jay Kapuchak, the principal at Peakview Elementary School, who was just recently honored with the Outstanding Leadership Award by the Virginia Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development, VASCD. So that's a great honor. He and 8 others were recognized there, and that's one of the premier awards for school leadership in Virginia. So congrats to Jay.
Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. I think I'm just going to save some comments to the end after we go through in the interest of time. We'll move into action items. Board members, the minutes for August 23rd needed to be amended, so we have, in your packet, you have the amended minutes. We need a motion to approve those minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes as amended for August 23rd.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Do we have a second? Thank you, Mr. Falk. Any questions or discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries 4-0. Next are the minutes for the September 13th, 2021 meeting. Do we have a motion for approval? So moved. Thank you, Mr. Falk. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Any questions or discussion on those minutes, board members? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries 4-0. Field trips, Dr. Scheichel.
You have 3 field trips for your approval tonight, and this is a highlight. As you know, annually we try to send students to the FFA National Convention, and for a long time we were talking about whether this would be possible and during the pandemic, and we will be able to send students. So we have some restrictions on travel there, just like for international travel. We are asking families to provide a negative COVID test within 3 days of travel, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, how we will provide actually the testing, because testing is right now sometimes difficult to come by, and so we will provide those. And then also masks, of course, are mandatory on transportation and indoors. And we also have a restriction in terms of the hotels. So fully vaccinated students can be in the same room. If students are not fully vaccinated, then they either, if a family member is traveling with them, of course, they can be in the same hotel room, but otherwise they will have single occupancy. And so we're working through all that. And our advisors and Mr. Fitzgerald have worked hard to make that possible. And so I'm looking forward to those field trips. And they're in your materials for Broadway High School for 21 students, October 26th through 30. And then Spotswood High School, 10 students to Indianapolis, October 26th through the 30th. And then a band trip, the Senior Regional Orchestra, November 11th through 13. 3 students to EC Glass High School. There is still a tryout process, but if the students qualify for this, then the same regulations will apply to this field trip. So because it is an overnight field trip, so we will have the same COVID mitigation strategies in place. And I do recommend with all those mitigation strategies in place that you approve those 3 field trips. So FFA for Broadway and Spotswood, and band for Spotswood High School.
Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendations regarding the field trips presented. Do we have a motion for approval?
I move that we approve the field trips as presented.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Do we have a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Falk. Any questions or discussion for Dr. Scheichel? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes. Okay. Right. Thank you. Okay. We are headed now into information items. Dr. Scheichel, you have an update for us?
I know that you said you'll hold your comments until later, because I know as soon as you saw superintendent's update, you knew we were in for a long evening, especially since it said COVID and innovation update. So 7:12 is when we get started. Let's see how long this takes. Yeah. I know the mic will run out of battery eventually, so I think we're good. I wanted to provide a couple of updates related to COVID, but also related to innovative ways to teach history that we use in Rockingham County, but also innovative ways to structure the school day. So for a long time, we've had a calendar that included extra days that, if we had no snow, would be given back to teachers. Teachers are contracted to teach no more than 180 days. That's basically the maximum that we have. And when we run close to our 990 instructional hour limit, sometimes we have to consider makeup days, we have to do all these other things. But the General Assembly last year approved a new option that really came out of all the efforts by local school districts to provide remote instruction. As we know, we prefer to have our students in the building, but when the circumstances warrant it, and when we want to make sure that we don't run out of instructional hours, it's a good approach to use these so-called unscheduled remote learning days. So if we expect a snowstorm and students have access to devices, then there can be a remote instruction. And so the final regulations just came out last week. So there's still a lot of discussion, how does that affect, for example, meals in school, and what efforts have to be made, and a number of other things. And so with the final regulations now out, we are hoping to take advantage of this. Now, a snow day is completely going away? No, we do know there's some joy in waking up to snow and saying, oh, it's a snow day, and the kids are home. And we're not going to entirely eliminate snow days, but it gives us a safety cushion, right? It allows us to schedule a little bit differently. It is a little bit safer to assume that there'll be a spring break, because again, if need be, we have some of these days where where we have to shut down for whatever the reason is, whether it's snow or flooding or whatever it is. And so we're going to take advantage of these. It's important to know that this, of course, depends on the availability of internet service. And in rural communities, that's really difficult sometimes. And Rockingham County, you may have read this in the newspaper a few weeks ago, Rockingham County, county government, is working with a vendor that will look at providing broadband to every home in Rockingham County that has an electric meter. So the concern is always, what happens, how do you get to that last mile? How do you get to the last mile? And there's collaboration, with SVEC, and so where they can use the middle mile for that, and then the last mile would be covered by the vendor. And it's a tremendously expensive project. And county government has been asked by the vendor, to provide. There's a certain funding level that has to happen. And likely the Board of Supervisors may reach out to us, too, to use some of our ESSER funds to contribute to this effort. So that's all still in the works. At this point, this would be a 2-year project. And in the fall or in the spring, they will do, even this part of this fall, there will be a feasibility study. Our advantage is that, because of the COVID pandemic, we've already deployed, or we deployed last year, a significant number of wireless access points, of hotspots that could be given to families so that the students could work from home when they had to. And we still have those hotspots. So there's some financial investment into activating those again. And at this point, we're simply working with middle and high schools to do that to families who need those hotspots. But if we had a winter where we really have to be concerned about hours, Then we could also, again, deploy the hotspots to elementary families, to deploy the devices that elementary families have, and then take advantage of these opportunities. So when we're out of school, that something actually can happen instructionally. And that is something we're planning to use this year, and as a result, I'm suggesting an adjustment to our calendar. Again, the 183 days that are in the calendar, we do not go above 180. And so there are 3 days in the fall that we feel can be returned at this point. So to really have a 180-day calendar. And so those 3 days, they are spread out between now and Thanksgiving, October 8th, October 18th, and November 12th. So it's 2 Fridays and a Monday. And those will become non-school days. And so we have now, because of this possibility, not as much of a need for those 3 bank days, and so we can give those back at this point. We're still staying at 180. We're not saying because we can take 10 remote learning days, we're going down to 173 or whatever it may be. We're staying at 180, but these are 3 days that would now become non-school days in the fall. Another issue, and this is simply an update again on our efforts to solve this ongoing national teacher shortage, ongoing national substitute shortage. We have a bus driver shortage. We've talked about all these. You see it in practically every industry now too. It's really difficult to hire people. And our HR staff, they've done an amazing job recruiting. We are looking at universities to talk to practicum students. Hey, get your friends to substitute. We're really reaching out in many different ways to increase the number of substitutes. But because substitutes are in short supply, what we see currently is that many teachers really lose their planning period to basically substituting for another teacher who may be out. And so there are a number of steps that we're taking to help with that. One, and we'll announce the specifics to the community as well, we will increase substitute teacher pay to $105 per day for retired teachers that will be hired to, I believe, 120 and then 130 for long-term substitutes. So they're all incrementally raised to that. What we are also doing, because teachers and administrators are covering classes, as central office staff, we will participate in that coverage as well. So this is a strain on everyone. It's a strain currently on teachers. It's a strain on nurses, who already have full-time jobs and now need to deal with all the additional COVID work. It is office staff, it's custodians, it's bus drivers. We really see it across the board. And I will say that, some of us who are licensed to drive a school bus, we've offered to drive a bus if it's needed. But we're also offering to spend time in the buildings with whatever that school needs. So for the time between now and Thanksgiving, we created a spreadsheet, and so instructional staff at central office, including the 2 assistant superintendents and myself, will be in a school. We asked that each staff member select a school, so that will be their building, and 1 day a week at a minimum they will spend at that school. If the school is fully staffed, obviously, we can work remotely from there, but we'll be available for whatever is needed, including substitute teaching. If custodial work is needed, we'll help with that too. And so at most of our schools, it'll be 2 staff members that each will claim 1 day at a minimum each week. At our smallest schools, that will be 1 person. And so that's certainly one attempt for us to be at the schools and help out. It certainly adds then to those central office staff members' workload, because the work that they would have done on that day has to be done some other time. But again, everyone is sharing in that workload right now, because certainly school staff are, and they are using their own planning time to now be in other people's classrooms. At the high schools, we have a slightly different approach. Broadway High School has piloted this, and it's worked really well. Last year during the pandemic, the high school teachers and middle school teachers, some at the elementary as well, of course, created a lot of asynchronous lessons. And so at the high schools, what teachers do is, if they are out, they provide an asynchronous lesson. So that the students will be able to access their work on their laptops, and they are supervised in the building, and we can actually pool multiple classes into a larger space where there's simply supervision, and then the students can work on their asynchronous lessons. That's one way to then not need as many subs at the high school level, and those subs that may have worked at the high school level can now help elsewhere. So there are multiple efforts to make sure that we help our schools. And so again, that worked really well at Broadway High School, and so we're looking at the other schools as well. But those are the items that we hope help us with our substitute shortage in a number of areas. We've, again, had meetings with nurses, again, to talk about what's needed there. There's some funding to hire additional staff, but again, we would have to have applicants that are available. This topic, I know this actually came up at the conference that Dr. McQuilkin and Ms. Lohr attended. It's really important to know that this conversation about is critical race theory taught in our schools is a national conference. Every school board deals with it. Every school board is faced with the same allegations, and it certainly indicates that that there's an effort to really talk about public schools doing something that's not appropriate at that age level across the board. And so it's this national effort, I think, to discredit what happens in our schools sometimes. And the NSBA did a really good job distinguishing between what is critical race theory, so college level courses, graduate level courses, about the role of law in potentially creating barriers based on race. But that's different from some of the things that we hear about. And so there's a really good explanation of what educational equity is and how that's different from CRT. So No Child Left Behind and ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, both include requirements to close achievement gaps, because we still see varying levels of opportunity for different population groups. And it's not just race. And this is what I've said before. We're trying to focus on making every student successful. And it's this last sentence here in the NSBA statement about educational equity versus critical race theory that's important to understand. Approaches to equity will differ in every district, but the goal is the same: excellent outcomes for all students. And what we have to realize is that when we talk about history, which seems to be this topic where we're consistently accused of teaching white kids to apologize or to feel bad about themselves, that would violate that last statement, and it's not what we do. When we talk about teaching history in Rockingham County, there are a couple of ways we make sure that students recognize themselves in history. History, the way it's taught in many places around the world. When I was a student back in Austria, we learned a ton about emperors and kings and queens and battles. We never saw common people in the history books. We never saw much about women in history books. It was about the leaders of those empires. And I didn't really get interested in history until I started to read things that really related to what life for the majority of the population was like. And when I came to the United States, one of my first attempts was, to make sure that I studied the history that you typically read about, so the political history of presidents and those kinds of things, but also the history of the working class, the history of the role that women played in American history, and the role that all population groups played. And I think when you look at what we do, you see this broad range that does touch on difficult subjects in history. So when we talk about the Civil War, we don't just read the history books. We do that, of course. But we had a project at Antietam Battlefield where students became tour guides for their peers. They had to research everything about that battle and then serve as the tour guides. How do I know I was there when that happened? My daughter was involved in that. So they really studied every aspect, and then different groups at different locations at the battlefield would present that information to their peers. And so they had to explain it. They had to answer questions. And when you explain something to someone, you learn way more about it than you ever learn by simply memorizing it. And that's important. A Rockingham County parent recently posted on Facebook related to this CRT discussion, well, why don't we teach about Skyline Drive and how it impacted the population in Rockingham County? Well, guess what? We already do. And I talk to that parent, and it's always so interesting once we engage in conversation and talk about the substance, what we get to, right? And so we had a great conversation about his family and the background of his family as it relates to those events when the national park was created. Lots of people were basically driven out of the mountains, and there's still animosity today, almost 100 years later or 80 years later, about the role of the national government, the role of the park rangers. And so at East Rockingham High School, which is of course the high school closest to that area, students took a class on this, and the class is offered every year. We don't have students signed up every year, but it's offered every year. And they created an exhibit on exactly this topic. That's like their families. They talk to their grandparents who may still remember some of that, right? Or they pass down those stories. And so that speaks to kids, and they get involved at a completely different level, right? When we talk about the civil rights era, we have to talk about the fact that black students weren't allowed to go to the same school as white students. And that's not that long ago, right? When I was born in another country, of course, but at that time, it just became legal for a white person to marry a black person in Virginia. I heard stories from nurses that say, when I worked in this ward, in the labor and delivery ward at RMH, black women had to deliver in a separate part of the hospital, right? Those are stories that are still passed down. And it's okay to talk about that. That doesn't mean someone has to feel guilty about it who was born in 1980 or in 1990 or in 2002, right? But we talk about it. 2 examples when we talk about the civil rights era. The Farmville tour guides, where schools were shut down so that they could avoid having black kids go to school with the white kids. Schools were shut down. Public schools were shut down for years, and as a result of that, a family moved to Harrisonburg. And in Harrisonburg, so when we talk about systemic racism, so black families couldn't live in the same neighborhoods where white families lived, and so they couldn't attend those schools. But the Mennonite community in the Parkview area of Harrisonburg allowed a family to move in. They had come here from Farmville. It's the Yule family. And dad was an educator, mom worked in schools as well. And so they lived in this neighborhood now. And the school was called Park School. And if you think about how long it took in Rockingham County to integrate, the Supreme Court said in Brown versus Board in 1954 that schools need to integrate, right? Separate is no longer equal. In 1964, the Yule kids lived in that area, and back then you had to apply enrichment for an exception, to if you wanted to have black kids attend your school. And so the principal, John Scott Bender at Park School, he called central office and he said, well, you'll have to call Richmond. He said, I can't do that because I can't send these kids home, right? The white guy, it doesn't mean we have to feel sorry for being white. And the principal at that school recognized that's not right. And so we're going to do something about it. There's so many things to celebrate. And students at Broadway High School actually did a video project interviewing the Yules. I never knew this before then, but I personally know one of the kids. Chuck Yule, he happens to be a soccer referee. So the only thing I always said is Chuck doesn't know what's a foul and what isn't. So we always had these jokes going back and forth. And it was at the Parkview dedication of that marker that's over across the street from Eastern Mennonite School that Chuck and I talked about his role in history. I never knew this. And it's connections with people that we know. It's in the same soccer field with him so many times. And that's what we need to engage in. And that's difficult, right? In Farmville, again, you see pictures there. The picture on the right is the marker at Park School. The one on the left is 3 students speaking in Farmville on at the exact sites where these events happened, where schools had shut down, where students led protests. And they presented the information, and they talked to family members of the kids that were involved. And so there is lots of difficult history. And it's okay to not shy away from it and to say, you know what, but that's not going to happen again. And if people think that only happens here, no. Where I grew up, when it's difficult conversations with our grandparents, right? When you talk about 6 million Jews disappearing in Austria and Germany and what happened. And those are your parents and grandparents. And That doesn't mean they're personally to blame, right? That doesn't mean I feel guilty about it as a person, but it's history we have to deal with, and that's how we need to teach history. We teach history about presidents, and we can also say that they're complicated people, right? We can talk about Jefferson and the slaves. We can talk about the Constitution saying, a slave is worth 60% of a white person, of a free person when it comes to representation in Congress, right? We can talk about those things. That doesn't mean the Constitution isn't an amazing document, and that there's an amazing process that went into that. But these are complicated people. Robert E. Lee, so many redeeming qualities, right, of Civil War generals who felt loyalty to their state. They're not simple good or evil. They're complicated people, and the historical forces that are involved, they need to inspire us to make the country, closer to that promise. When you say all men are created equal. Well, at the time that meant white property-owning men. We've gone away from that, right? Women have the right to vote. Everyone, who qualifies today by age and, isn't a convicted felon, whatever other exceptions you have, they can vote. And so we're getting closer and closer to this idea. And that's, I think, how we have to inspire our kids, not to say you need to feel bad for who you are. And I think it's one of the most disappointing pieces in what I currently see all the time, is that teachers are personally attacked for bringing books into their classrooms that present a variety of perspectives and then offer them as optional readings. And to see those teachers attacked on Facebook, I think that just needs to stop. There's a state curriculum that talks about teaching various viewpoints, and it's a good strategy. And if people want to complain about what's taught in our schools, complain to me, right? This is how we do this in Rockingham County. But don't shame teachers in Facebook comments so that I get calls from husbands who are worried about their family's safety, or people feel like they're being followed. It's not appropriate. It is simply not appropriate, and our teachers don't deserve it. They do all these amazing things, and this happens when you look at opinion polls on public education. The political pressure creates polls that say, people don't have the greatest view of public education. But when you ask people about their child's school, they inevitably say how much they like their child's school. They may not like public education, but if everyone likes their child's school, you know what the real picture is. And I would ask everyone to tone down the rhetoric that threatens teachers, that makes people afraid to provide balanced viewpoints in the classroom, and to do that to other central office staff members. As superintendent, I have invited many people to just come and talk. Bring your information, and we'll talk about it. But bring real information, because what we will no longer teach is what we read in history books in 1957 that say slaves didn't have it so bad because one of the benefits they had was job security. Virginia textbook from 1957. We're not teaching that because that's a viewpoint that we don't deserve to even bring to the table. Maybe as a historical relic, but not as something that how we present what happened in history. This came up on numerous occasions, so I want to set the record straight one more time. The Virginia Inquiry Collaborative. This is the third year it exists. We did not participate in the first year. 4 other school divisions did. Rockingham County was not one of them. We participated in 2020, 2021, because the topics were world history, world geography. We had a chance to work with one of the most authoritative figures in history education who developed this inquiry design model where students could conduct inquiries, right? Like what we do as tour guides in Farmville maybe. But the inquiries that resulted from this, Kurdish independence, what would it take for Kurds to have independence, and the role of women in South American democratic revolutions. Specifically, we decided to participate that year. And that's my decision as superintendent, whether we participate. It's not about shaming teachers by releasing the names online. Talk to me about it. Bring your evidence, and we can talk about it. We're currently, by the way, not participating. Again, there was a question previously. I said, I don't know. depends on topics, depends on what we try to accomplish. With a substitute shortage and wanting to have our teachers in the buildings, we're not currently participating in the VSC. So this idea that we're trying to bring curriculum to Rockingham County to make white kids feel bad for being white is simply not accurate. Another topic that we are innovative in has to do with our connection with law enforcement. You saw an article about our school resource officer at East Rock. It's been said that we're trying to get rid of SROs. We added an SRO this year. And I want to point to one program because it just came up last week. I was I'm the regional representative to the superintendent's judges liaison meetings in Richmond. And so for every superintendent's region, there's one superintendent and one judge. And then leadership from various organizations, Virginia Juvenile Criminal Justice, and so on. And we talked about how SRO programs should be done well. There are school districts across the country where you see those relationships not being good. Right? Just like with the issues of race. We see examples where a school district does something. That doesn't mean it happens here. There are stories about school resource officers hitting kids in an elementary school in South Carolina. Our current resource officers are specially trained to be in schools, to build relationships. Many were students in our schools, and they're some of the most amazing people you'll ever meet. And you can see how much they care about kids, that the Sheriff's Department was immediately willing with us to engage in a project that had started in West Virginia. And at last Friday's meeting, when this came up, how the Virginia Department of Education and Juvenile Justice, they all support this process called Handle with Care. And then they said, and there are a couple school districts, Rockingham, Harrisonburg, Tazewell, that did this before it was a thing in Virginia, because we had already talked to law enforcement. So if law enforcement is involved with a family and there are children in the home, or there's a child next door, that can be traumatizing, right, under certain circumstances. And so the Sheriff's Department lets us know, and all we do is we give a notification to staff, handle this child with care, so that the staff members know something happened. This isn't about want to know. They don't need to know what happened. They need to know that that child may just be facing some difficulties in the school day because of what happened the night before at home. It's only reported that way. Handle with care, that's all they know. And we had hour-long meetings with law enforcement to talk about which cases would they report, right? How would they, for example, report when other kids maybe came down the street because at one house something's going on? Do we now figure out who are all these kids that the schools can know because they care, right? And so our law enforcement partners, they're involved in all kinds of new projects with us all the time. We review what's best for kids. And so just because you see bad press elsewhere, that doesn't mean it happens here. I just had a call from the DNR again the other day. But wait a second, we're hearing about movements to not have SROs instead, not in Rockingham, right? Because they're specially selected. Brian Hutchison, our sheriff, does an amazing job bringing the right law enforcement officers into our buildings that create special connections with our kids, so that it's a positive relationship. They go into classrooms, and we've done it for a long, long, long time, right? As for COVID, you can see these are the two data trends in Rockingham County since the beginning of the pandemic. Blue, the 7-day count, orange, the 14-day count. So we're on a slight downward slope again. Hopefully the peak of this latest outbreak with the Delta variant is behind us. We'll have to wait a little bit longer to make sure we know, but it's certainly, we're hopeful that we are again now reducing cases. It's important to understand what we sometimes see in the media. So when you look at, not all hospitals released information publicly. This is from South Carolina. When you look at the percentage of people who are hospitalized and the difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated people, it's a stark difference, as it is with the ICU, as it is with those on ventilators, right? And so that's important to know. There's one story, and this gives me a chance to just explain why we can't just always look at numbers. It came out recently that in Israel, when you look at severe cases in hospitals, 300 people in the hospital were fully vaccinated, 214 were not vaccinated. That gives you pause when you see that. It's like, how can that be? More fully vaccinated people than unvaccinated people. And this is accurate information, by the way. And Jeffrey Morris, who's a statistical data scientist, and he is from the University of Pennsylvania, did a really amazing write-up on this, because he said you can't just look at it like that unless you know, for example, what percentage of the population is vaccinated. 78.7% in Israel are fully vaccinated. So once you know that and you calculate that in, now you all of a sudden see per 100,000 population, those who are not vaccinated, 16.4 people are severe cases. For those who are fully vaccinated, per 100,000, 5.3. And so when we calculate efficacy versus severe disease, so 67.5% of cases that would otherwise have happened aren't happening because of vaccination. That's the impact of vaccination. And it gets even more interesting when you understand that there's a big difference between those over 50 and younger than 50. And this is one of the, I had to read this a few times. So if it's 67% efficacy for the entire population, interestingly enough, when you break it out in younger than 50 and older than 50, both of them are higher than the combined effect. And that seems counterintuitive, but that's what we have to understand when we look at these numbers. These numbers about more people fully vaccinated in hospitals, yes, initially you look at that and you say, how can that be? But when you look at the actual data, because hospital patients are vastly overrepresented in the older population, and that population also has a much higher vaccination rate, 90%, not just the average 78%, now you get a completely different picture. So it's called Simpson's paradox, that when you look at an entire population, you can see one result, and when you break it down, both of them are actually different. And this happens actually even with medical treatments. So this is one of the explanations. The link is there if anyone's interested. But if you only looked at the combined population on the left-hand side, and let's say that's a treatment and an effect, right? And on the left-hand side, when you look at the entire population, you'd say, okay, yep, this is really good. We have, the more we give of the treatment, the better the outcome, right? Until you break it down between men and women, or those over 50 and under 50, you can actually get the exact opposite effect. So it's really important in medical research and in all statistics to see, are there factors that actually make the results different? There's one example that they also presented in that link, and it's something like you could ask the entire population whether they prefer chocolate milk over regular milk, and the entire population may prefer chocolate milk. When you break it out into men and women, both men and women prefer regular milk. That's Simpson's paradox. So you have to always know what the factors are that make a difference. And it depends on how many people are in the study and how it's distributed. Okay? When we talk about masks, we looked at the University of Virginia Biocomplexity Institute. So they run models based on historic data, and so they looked at an environment where you have 50% mask compliance. So that's that blue curve you see at the top. If you start with 140 cases, they drop, okay, even if only half the people wear masks. Then they ran it for 90% mask compliance. Okay? So you can see that there's a big difference between 50% mask compliance and 90% mask compliance. But what's even more interesting are the other three curves. So we focus on masks. It's one tool we can clearly see, we can implement across the board. But the others are isolation after, so the blue and the gray curves are with no isolation, right? People who have symptoms, they just wear their mask. That's all they do. But then you look at symptomatic people isolating on day 1 of symptoms, on day 2 of symptoms, on day 5 of symptoms. And if people would simply stay home when they're sick and isolate, we'd be in a much better position. So that's also an appeal to the community. If you're sick, stay home. Wait until you know whether this is what you have and your symptoms improve. If we wouldn't have to wear masks if people simply isolated, and we could improve ventilation and some of these other things. And so we have to get to that point, right, where people stay home when they're sick. I hear day in and day out from nurses, kids are sent to school sick. We shouldn't be doing that. It's our path out of this, is to do those things. Masks can become optional if people stay home, if we improve ventilation, and if we have access to testing so that we find out whether someone is COVID positive. And we have to get to that point. But it starts with some of the things everyone can do, right? And that is to stay home when they're sick. When it comes to testing right now, you've read a lot about shortages of tests. We are going to participate in the VISTA testing program, so that means every week a vendor will come into the building and offer PCR testing to whoever consented to be tested, and then 20% of that population group will be tested. That's random screening testing. It's not about symptomatic testing. This is simply to test those who want to know, right, and who sign consent. No student would be tested without parent consent. That's important to know. Again, we've already done an initial survey, and we'll send out consent forms, again, for formal consent, right, so we know who will participate. But because we signed up for that, we were told that we could also access some of the Binax Now home tests that people have trouble finding now at Walgreens or CVS or Walmart. And originally, we were hoping that they would send us 650 tests. Well, last week, 1,400 tests were delivered to central office. So they're sitting in my office right now. And it allows us, in cases where someone is a close contact, so someone tested positive, one of our students or one of our staff members was determined to be a close contact. If they don't show symptoms, rather than, as some school districts require, a 14-day quarantine, or as we currently do, a 10-day quarantine, we can now help families and help staff determine after 5 days of quarantine whether they can actually return sooner. So normally we allow that if you take your test, even if it's a rapid antigen test at CVS or at Walmart. These are the same tests you can buy and do at home, but they come with an additional feature. And the additional feature is they come with free teleproctoring, if you want to call it that. So you install the app on your phone, you say, you create the account, I have a test, it connects you to a video feed with a proctor, you show them your ID, they walk you through the process, you scan the QR code on the test, they walk you and watch you swab yourself, so anyone 15 and older can do a self-swab, everyone else, parents could do it at home if they want to, and then a 15-minute timer starts, the next person comes on, reads the results with you, and then you get an official document. So it's the same process that's used at CVS or Walgreens with these tests, but it can be done at home because there's verification of who's taking the test and that they take it the right way. And the example there is, so when the first box shipped on Thursday, that's the first thing I did. I pulled one out and walked through the process to make sure it was user-friendly. And then on the phone, if someone says, if because I need to travel, I can simply show them the app and say, here's my latest negative test result. And so we have 1,400 of those available, and we will start to distribute those to families as needed if a student's a close contact, and to staff, again, if they want to. So no one's forced to do it, but it's one other option, one other tool in our arsenal. And so hopefully with the combination of these mitigation strategies, we'll soon be in a place where school becomes even more like an environment that we are used to, without masks, when it's feasible, when numbers are down, and when people can test and have easy access to tests even in our schools. And the vaccine is available for 5 to 11-year-olds for families that want it. If you have any questions about these topics, feel free to ask.
Board members, questions for Dr. Scheichel?
Dr. Scheichel, maybe you've already looked at it, but I would ask you to look at it again. The days that are selected, the 8th, the 18th, and the 12th, they're all odd days. So
Yeah, and
maybe we should pick different
right.
days.
Well, no, the dates actually work for the schools. With a change between odd and even days, we can make an adjustment to
Okay.
what's an odd day and what's an even day.
Okay. So
But
we're
in
not
terms
gonna
of where the
miss
dates fall and what's going on in schools, we had some other dates that we're going to use, but there are events like the Give Back to the Community Day at Broadway, so that would have been a day that we originally had looked at. There are vaccination clinics to catch students up on other childhood vaccines that we're holding in schools. So we went through a number of iterations and then basically looked at which dates work for the division and work for the individual schools without conflicts with events that are already scheduled. And so the odd even schedule, that's always something we can adjust. So if we handle it, like a snow day, for example, in one of the cases now, if you had that even day, you're not just skipping the odd day, you're just moving that odd day to the next day.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So the teacher and substitute shortage, is there any other relief that we're thinking of offering for teachers? I had one teacher approach me. They would love to be able to loosen up the dress code a little bit so that they can wear jeans. And while I was doing my laundry today, I was thinking, if I didn't have to iron this. So could we do something like that for the teachers as well?
Yeah, so we talked about this in principals meetings just this past week, and I would say this: there's certainly an expectation that we dress appropriately for school, right? So not every day can be a pajama day. But when it comes to, for example, jeans days, we can already, administrators can relax that. I don't want to implement, mandatory jeans days, right? So, but I think dress code and having casual dress code is certainly okay. There's no resistance, at central office. We were very intentional too, to talk about, when we're in buildings, right? I don't wear a suit to work every day. And again, for teachers, that certainly we can reiterate that with principals, that the dress code, again, as long as it meets our requirements in terms of what we want, staff to dress like. But if we can use jeans days, for example, as incentives for fundraisers, then certainly, in the current time, that can be implemented across the board. So no one has any objections to that, and we actually talked about this in principals meetings already. That's these dress codes, are certainly a little bit flexible.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have.
Any other questions, board members? The only question I have for you, Dr. Scheikel, is can you just, obviously some of the school districts that are close to us, divisions, have made the decision to shorten the school day, and we've gone with trying to give a few extra days off instead. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about the factors in deciding that this is better for us versus the other?
Ms. Ham, do you want to? We talked about this a lot last year, right? What's the impact of the shortened school day? These are the conversations, by the way, that we look for and that we appreciate. I've said this previously. Thanks for serving on SEAC, right? Because as we consider all these future possibilities for how a school day could be structured, it can't happen without input from families. And Ms. Ham can also attest to the fact that I'm perfectly willing to have long conversations about this. We talked about what's the end game when we give teachers time back for collaboration, right? And last year, when we even suggested to shorten the school day, 6 months out, right? So how about next August, 8 months out at that time when we suggested it, that really creates a burden on families to say, you know what, we have a sub shortage, and so now your child's coming home an hour earlier every day. I talked to other superintendents today who called me and said, rumor has it you're going to shorten the school day. The burden that places on families, if we already don't have subs, we don't have staff to now staff that hour if teachers didn't have that work time. I think that's much more difficult on families. It creates a particular burden, again, on families that have really difficult time securing child's care. If you have a child with a disability, for example, it's very difficult to now from one day to the next, every day now. Students coming home an hour earlier. We provide these services. What happens there? Going to 180 days simply aligns us with our regular calendar. We have 180 days, and we can give 3 back, and we always deal with a single day not being a school day. So that means you have to adjust for that, and every family is ready for that, right? Every year, we don't know which days we're going to get a snowstorm. We don't know always ahead of time, when roads are flooded and we can't travel. And so to me, that is time that is easier to manage for families. And so we talked about, that shortened school day. I wonder where Harrisonburg got the idea. Right? We had these conversations with Harrisonburg last year, and also because of MTC and all the connected things. But the impact on families on such a short notice may be possible in a more confined geographic area where you have single opportunities, in larger childcare settings. But in a county like Rockingham, again, that was difficult enough to think through 8 months out, much less from one day to the next. So certainly, we keep our families in mind, when we talk about what additional burden we can place on families. So that's why, because you and I had so many conversations about that, right?
Okay. Which actually brings me to another question that I thought about. So with Harrisonburg going to a shortened, are they working through that with MTC now?
MTC operates on our schedule.
Okay. So Harrisonburg will figure out what they need to do with their students that would be at MTC even beyond
Yep.
that.
So, we had some solutions, last year when it came to transportation. So I don't have the answer for how Harrisonburg is dealing with MTC, but certainly MTC is going to operate, again, on our schedule, on our days. And the city will have to, maybe families come to the school that hour late, because I don't think buses are going to be just running that hour later. Maybe those students, if they're not already driving, have to be picked up.
Well, last year they went through the year where they weren't in school, but we were.
Right.
And MTC was in school for the entire year last year, so,
Mhm.
okay. All right. I think that's it. That was the only question I had for you. So thank you. Thank you for that presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, board members, you have the attendance report for August 2021 in your folders for your review as needed. And then we'll move into other business, school board questions and answers and feedback. So, Mr. Falk?
I'd just like to congratulate planning staff and all of our staff in all the schools for continuing to do such a good job in a difficult environment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Dr. McQuilkin?
I echo Mr. Falk's sentiments, and we'd like to thank the staff and Dr. Scheichel and everyone involved in the fact that we try to find the facts, we try to follow the science, and we have utmost a priority in mind to keep our students, our staff safe while they're in school.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Ms. Lohr?
Thank you. Dr. Scheichel, I recently heard about a case where we had a very near miss with one of our students on the side of the road. They were standing waiting for the bus. The bus had the lights flashing, the arm deployed, and somebody passed the bus around them. Further talking to the bus driver, I found out that this was a repeat offender. So I inquired about bus cameras, and I was told that we don't have any on the arm. We went through a process years ago, but something happened with the supplier, and I was wondering if we could revisit that, finding a supplier, a vendor that can help us out with that problem.
Yeah, so the issue in the past wasn't necessarily with the vendor. The issue happens when there's a process for then getting a ticket to the person that's the offender, and how much that involves the sheriff's department. And I believe I wasn't part of those conversations when that happened, and other board members, I'm sure, can provide those insights. There were issues with ordinances in Rockingham County that may have been changed since then, but it's, again, a dash camera isn't going to help in that case, right? You'd have to show that the arm was deployed and that the picture's taken, on the stop arm. And so there was a pilot, I believe, that was supposed to happen. And so we certainly can investigate that. The safety of our students is obviously our primary concern. And when you read the statistics on how many times deployed stop arms are ignored, then you really do worry about it. The bus driver did a phenomenal job keeping the students safe, right? Because
Absolutely.
this is when students cross the road and it can get really dangerous, and sometimes people pass the bus on the right too, and so these are really dangerous situations. Not only again is this an appeal to the public to drive safely and pay attention to school buses, but also we can certainly investigate that in relation to how the project worked previously. But there were, legal issues involved as well. And so I don't know if other board members want to comment on that, but it's something we can certainly look into.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Lohr. Dr. Scheichel?
I'll pass.
Thank you. I'm just going to reiterate a couple of things that Dr. Scheichel said in his presentation. We really do need this community to be supportive of our teachers and our staff and our administrators right now. There is an undercurrent right now of some not very polite rhetoric. You want to come after the school board members and the superintendent, as you have, okay. But our teachers are trying to do a job right now, and they're working very hard under incredible circumstances. And for them to be worried about their families, for them to get phone calls, which are not very polite, for them to get emails, for there to be postings. If you have a complaint about a teacher, talk to an administrator, talk to Dr. Scheichel's office. That's what school board members do when we hear things. We have a conversation with Dr. Scheichel, and he works through that, and he follows up with us. But this insistent to publicly shame people who are working so hard in this community, and it's not just our teachers, it's nurses and it's doctors and it's community organizations and it's the checkout person at the grocery store, is going to tear our community apart. It really is. We've got to stop it. And we need people to stand up and say, we're not going to do this anymore. This is not Rockingham County. And so those are the kinds of things that deeply concern me as I finish my term here on Rockingham County School Board. That our teachers need to feel supported. And if you have problems, that you address them in the way that you would want somebody who had a problem with you addressed. So Dr. Scheichel, I appreciate you talking about that tonight. It's important for our community. And that kind of leads me to another thing. Dr. Scheichel talked about these days that we're going to take to give our teachers and our staff and our school buildings a rest and our custodians and everything. And I think that's great. And there's some people that are going to be unhappy because they're going to have to make arrangements. And this is one of those opportunities where community members can come together and they can share shifts of watching after each other's students, putting a play date together so that everybody doesn't feel a burden associated with this. And so we can provide our teachers the time that they need versus having to look at the other scenario, which would have been a shortened day, which I don't think any of us wanted to go down that road on such short notice. But I think there's going to need to be some soft shoulder help between community members to get through a little bit of this too. Now, other people will probably think it's great. We get some time to spend off, and it's fall, the weather's great, we can go hiking and do things as families, but to some it's going to be a burden. And so if you know somebody that's going to be a burden, or if you know some at-risk children that we have in the community that are going to need to have a look-see, then reach out to those families and be helpful to those families and be helpful for those students. I think that we would greatly appreciate if you did that. So I will get off my soapbox for tonight and say thank you to all of you that are here with us this evening. We greatly appreciate it. We have students in the house, do we not? This is the most amount of students, high schoolers, that we've had with us in quite some time. We know that come, well, April, we'll have a lot more probably, but we appreciate you being here with us tonight. What school are you all from? Spotswood? Oh,
All right.
All right. Mr. Breen would be proud. He's not here with us this evening, but he would have loved to have seen all of you here with us tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for getting through the start of the year. You're all seniors, right? So we're going to make it all the way through to graduation this year. That's everybody's hope and what we want. See you all walk across the stage, hopefully in the usual places that we see graduation. And so thanks for coming tonight. We appreciate it. And if you need us to sign sheets or anything,
Yeah.
if you need us to sign sheets or anything after the meeting, just come on up, okay? Thank you for being here with us tonight. We're going to need to enter closed meeting. Safe travels home. And do we have a motion to enter closed meeting?
I move that the board enter a closed meeting to discuss and consider the following pursuant to the provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711, A1, personnel, specific public officers, appointees, or employees, including the division superintendent, for the purpose of considering such individuals' assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, salary, or resignation, and A2, one or more particular students specifically related to discipline and requests regarding compulsory school attendance based on religious beliefs that would involve disclosure of information contained in a scholastic record concerning a student.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Any questions or discussion, board members? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. We're in closed meeting. Thank you. Thanks.